She's in the company of some of the greatest players in this league. She's just doing things that just special players can do.
You never know how quickly they're going to adapt to the WNBA game coming from college. And I think that Caitlin has done surprisingly well how quickly she's adapted to this game. There's a lot of doubters out there, as we all know, and she has proved them all wrong.
I mean, it's not even something you're really ever aware of, breaking records or, it's just something that comes with playing the game the right way, I feel like, is, I just come out here and try to, play basketball in a way that people love watching, in a way that is going to make my team successful, and the records and whatever, or the stats, that's just what comes with it. But at the end of the day, I feel very thankful to be in a position and on a franchise that, has allowed me to really be myself and to come in here and, try to uplift this team in every way that I can.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. The Indiana Fever were supposed to be must-see television. They were supposed to be the team that everyone tuned in to watch. They were supposed to be the most exciting product in the WNBA. At one point, that was actually true. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I look at what's happened over the last year, the more convinced I become that something changed behind the scenes. When the Fever were exciting? They were exciting when Christy Sides was the head coach. I know some people don't want to hear that, but it's true. The offense wasn't perfect. The team wasn't perfect. Christy Sides wasn't perfect. But there was one thing she eventually figured out. She figured out that the best version of the Indiana Fever was the version where Caitlin Clark controlled everything. The more I hear about Amber Cox, Kelly Krauskopf, Stephanie White, and Lynn Dunn, the more I wonder if Christy Sides wasn't fired because of the team's struggles before the Olympic break. Maybe she was fired because of what happened after the Olympic break. Because after the break, the Fever started looking dangerous. After the break, Caitlin Clark looked like Caitlin Clark. After the break, the offense started flowing through her. And maybe that became a problem for people who didn't want to see that happen. Now, whether you agree with that theory or not, what we are watching right now looks nothing like the version of the Indiana Fever that captured everyone's attention. What made Caitlin Clark special at Iowa? What made her special during her rookie season? It wasn't just the logo threes. It wasn't just the assists. It wasn't just the highlights. It was freedom. She played fast. She played instinctively. She played with creativity. She played with confidence. And right now, that version of Caitlin Clark feels completely absent. Look at the game against the New York Liberty. That game felt like a perfect example of everything people have been complaining about. People keep saying, it's only one game. No, it's not. This has become a pattern. The Fever still have talent. They absolutely have talent. Aaliyah Boston is talented. Kelsey Mitchell is talented. Lexi Hull has value. Monique Billings can contribute. Caitlin Clark is obviously one of the most talented players in basketball. The problem isn't talent. The problem is how the talent is being used. And against New York, almost everybody struggled. Aaliyah Boston had one of her roughest performances of the season. Kelsey Mitchell was extremely inefficient. Caitlin Clark never looked comfortable. The offense became stagnant, the ball movement disappeared, the pace slowed down, and suddenly the most exciting player in basketball looked like just another player standing around waiting for something to happen. That's not what made Caitlin Clark famous. That's not what brought millions of viewers to the WNBA. That's not what made the Indiana Fever relevant. Caitlin Clark finished with 7 rebounds and 9 assists. On paper, those numbers don't look terrible, but anyone who watched the game knows that it wasn't the same. The energy wasn't there, the explosiveness wasn't there, the freedom wasn't there. And when people tune in to watch Caitlin Clark, they aren't tuning in because they want to watch a cautious, limited version of her game. They want to watch Caitlin Clark being Caitlin Clark. That's the entire point. Meanwhile, the officiating continues to become a major discussion. 5 fouls again, more foul trouble, more questionable calls, and that's what makes this situation so frustrating. Throughout her college career, Caitlin Clark generally avoided foul trouble. Even during her rookie WNBA season, it wasn't something that consistently defined her games. Now suddenly it feels like every game involves foul trouble, every game involves questionable whistles, every game involves conversations about officiating. And whether people agree or disagree, it's becoming impossible to ignore. Then you have the fourth quarter. The Fever entered the final period with a chance to win. Despite everything that went wrong, despite all the missed shots, despite all the offensive struggles, they were still in position to win the game. And then the offense completely collapsed. The ball stopped moving, the execution disappeared, the decision-making became questionable, and New York took control. That should concern everybody, because championship teams find ways to close. Good teams find ways to close. The Fever didn't. One bright spot was Monique Billings. Give her credit. She played hard, she was efficient, she rebounded, she finished around the basket. And honestly, I think Monique Billings is one of the players who would benefit the most from a faster, more aggressive Caitlin Clark-led offense. Players like Billings thrive when the pace increases. They thrive when transition opportunities increase. They thrive when defenses are forced to react. Instead, everything feels slower, everything feels more predictable, everything feels more structured. And that brings us back to Stephanie White. Because whether people like hearing it or not, coaches get judged by results. They get judged by what the product looks like. And right now, the product isn't entertaining, the product isn't efficient, the product isn't maximizing Caitlin Clark, and that's why criticism continues to grow. Then there is Kelsey Mitchell. Nobody questions her ability to score. Nobody questions her talent. But there are games where the efficiency disappears. There are games where the shot selection becomes a problem. There are games where the offense seems to stop completely. And when that happens, the Fever struggle. The issue isn't whether Kelsey Mitchell can score. The issue is whether the offense is creating winning basketball. Because there's a difference. A player can score 20 points and still have a negative impact on winning. And that's the conversation many fans are starting to have. Now let's talk about something even bigger. The fan reaction. This might be the most concerning part of all. For the first time, I'm seeing longtime Caitlin Clark supporters becoming frustrated. Not because they dislike Caitlin Clark, not because they've stopped supporting her, but because they don't recognize the version of Caitlin Clark they're watching. They watched her at Iowa, they watched her break records, they watched her dominate college basketball, they watched her transform the WNBA, and now they're asking a simple question. Where did that player go? Why does she look hesitant? Why does she look restricted? Why does she look frustrated? Why does she look different? Those questions aren't going away. And that's important because Caitlin Clark isn't just another player. She's the biggest attraction in women's basketball. She's the player who brought millions of new viewers to the league. She's the player who changed television ratings. She's the player who changed attendance numbers. People aren't tuning in because they want to watch ordinary basketball. They want to watch extraordinary basketball. They want to watch Caitlin Clark take over games. They want to watch deep threes. They want to watch impossible passes. They want to watch creativity. They want to watch confidence. And right now, that version of Caitlin Clark feels completely absent. But that doesn't mean the Fever can't fix it. That doesn't mean the season is over. That doesn't mean the team can't improve. But it does mean changes need to happen, because if things continue down this path, the criticism will only get louder. The expectations aren't changing. The spotlight isn't disappearing. The pressure isn't going away. And the conversations surrounding Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Monique Billings, Lexi Hall, Amber Cox, Kelly Krauskopf, Lynn Dunn, Carolyn Peck, Christy Sides, Cheryl Swoops, and everyone connected to this organization are only going to become more intense. At the end of the day, Indiana Fever fans want one thing. They want to watch exciting basketball. They want to watch winning basketball. And most importantly, they want to watch Caitlin Clark be Caitlin Clark. That's the version of this team people fell in love with. That's the version of this team that filled arenas. That's the version of this team that generated headlines. And until that version returns, these questions aren't going anywhere. The more games we watch, the more it feels like we're getting a preview of what the Indiana Fever could become if Stephanie White continues pushing this version of the offense. And that's where a lot of the frustration from fans is starting to build. One thing I've noticed recently is that the conversation isn't just about coaching anymore. More and more people are talking about Caitlin Clark herself, not because they suddenly dislike her, but because they're worried. They see the body language. They see the frustration. They see the interactions with referees. They see a player who doesn't always look like the same Caitlin Clark that took over college basketball and helped transform interest in the women's game. Many fans believe that frustration comes directly from the system she's playing in, but there's another concern emerging among supporters. Some are beginning to wonder whether Caitlin Clark is simply accepting this role. They're worried that instead of playing the free-flowing, aggressive style that made her a superstar, she's being asked to fit into a structure that limits what makes her special. And here's the reality that a lot of people don't want to hear. If Caitlin Clark becomes just another piece in the machine, some fans are going to lose interest. Now, that doesn't mean ratings will suddenly collapse overnight. Caitlin Clark has one of the most loyal fan bases in sports. People are still tuning in, people are still buying tickets, people are still hoping things will change. But there is a difference between watching because you're excited and watching because you're waiting for something to improve. A lot of fans are currently in that second category. What's interesting is that the most dedicated Caitlin Clark supporters may actually be the first ones to step away. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much. Think about it. The casual fan might turn on a game and say, maybe tonight Caitlin Clark goes off. But the hardcore supporters have watched every step of her journey. They watched her at Iowa. They watched the historic scoring performances. They watched the logo threes. They watched the incredible passes. They watched the confidence and creativity that made her must-see television. For those people, watching her look restricted is painful. They didn't become fans because Caitlin Clark was standing in the corner. They became fans because Caitlin Clark was Caitlin Clark. That's why so many people keep talking about wanting to see the offense opened up. They want to see the pace increase. They want to see more transition opportunities. They want to see the ball in her hands more often. And eventually, many fans believe there will come a moment where Caitlin Clark simply decides to play her game. Because whether people want to admit it or not, sports are entertainment. Winning matters. Of course it matters. But entertainment matters too. Fans have limited time, they have limited money, they have endless entertainment options competing for their attention every single day. If the product is exciting, people show up. If the product is boring, people eventually find something else to do. That's true in movies, that's true in television, and it's true in sports. Looking at the numbers from this game, nobody really played particularly well offensively. Aaliyah Boston finished 6 of 15, Kelsey Mitchell went 7 of 21, Caitlin Clark shot 4 of 14. The shooting struggles were everywhere. Then you look at Sophie Cunningham taking only 2 shots in 17 minutes. That's difficult to understand. Meanwhile, other players are getting significant offensive opportunities, while one of the most dynamic offensive players in basketball is spending long stretches away from the action. That disconnect is what continues to fuel criticism. Fans aren't just upset because the Fever lost. They're upset because they don't recognize what they're watching. The reaction online tells the story. After the game, comments flooded social media. Some fans criticized Aaliyah Boston, others targeted Kelsey Mitchell, many blamed Stephanie White, others pointed frustration toward management and ownership. The common theme wasn't just anger over a single loss, it was disappointment. People expected something very different from this team. One comment said Stephanie White had turned the most exciting offensive player in the WNBA into a decoy. Another called for major changes in the coaching staff. Others argued the current schemes are forcing players into uncomfortable roles and making everyone look worse collectively. Whether you agree with those comments or not, they reflect a growing frustration among a portion of the fan base. Then there's the Kelsey Mitchell discussion. This is where emotions really take over, because Kelsey Mitchell can be spectacular when she's scoring efficiently. Nobody questions her ability to put points on the board. But critics argue that when the shots stop falling, her weaknesses become much more noticeable. Down the stretch of this game, there were missed opportunities, difficult shots, questionable decisions, and possessions that left fans shaping their heads. That's why some people continue to debate her overall impact. Supporters point to the scoring totals, critics point to efficiency, decision-making, and overall team flow. It's a debate that isn't going away anytime soon. At the same time, coaching remains the biggest target. The questions keep coming. Why does the offense look so stagnant at times? Why is Caitlin Clark spending so much time off the ball? Why does the team look less dynamic than many expected? And perhaps the biggest question of all, at what point do adjustments become necessary? That's what fans keep asking. The injury discussion also plays a role here. Stephanie White has frequently discussed managing wear and tear and protecting players physically, but some fans push back on the idea that having Caitlin Clark off the ball automatically reduces risk. Their argument is simple. Setting screens, battling through contact, working in traffic, those things aren't exactly injury-free activities. In fact, some supporters believe those situations create their own physical challenges. Regardless of where someone stands on that debate, one thing appears clear. When Caitlin Clark isn't on the floor, the offensive struggles become even more noticeable. The pace slows, the creativity drops, the energy changes. And that's why so many people continue arguing that the offense should revolve more around her strengths. What's particularly interesting is that fans often reference the post-Olympic break stretch from 2024. Many remember that period as the moment when everything started clicking. Caitlin Clark was playing aggressively, Aaliyah Boston was thriving, Kelsey Mitchell was producing, the offense looked dangerous. Now they see a version that often appears hesitant and disconnected, and when that happens, criticism naturally follows. Perhaps the strongest criticism is directed at Stephanie White. A growing segment of fans believes the current system isn't maximizing the roster. They don't believe the offense is putting players in the best positions to succeed. They don't believe the product on the court matches the talent available. As a result, every loss increases the scrutiny. Every poor offensive performance fuels another round of debate. Then there was the defensive sequence involving Breanna Stewart. Fans pointed to a possession where Breanna Stewart attacked the basket against Caitlin Clark and received little defensive help. That moment became another example used by critics who believe the team's defensive structure has major problems. Breanna Stewart is one of the best players in basketball. When she gets favorable matchups, she's going to take advantage. That's exactly what happened. She recognized the situation, used her size, got to the rim, drew contact, and made the smart basketball play. The frustration from fans wasn't necessarily about Caitlin Clark being involved in the matchup. It was about the lack of support behind the play. Moments like that continue to fuel larger conversations about coaching decisions, defensive strategy, and overall team identity. And ultimately, that's where this entire discussion comes back to: identity. What exactly are the Indiana Fever trying to be? Because fans know what made Caitlin Clark special. They know what made the Fever exciting. They've seen the blueprint before. The question now is whether Stephanie White and the organization are willing to embrace it. Until that answer becomes clear, the debates will continue, the criticism will continue, and every game will be viewed through the same lens. Are we watching Caitlin Clark at her best, or are we watching a version of Caitlin Clark that fans barely recognize? For many supporters, that's the question that matters more than anything else.
The frustration surrounding the Indiana Fever right now is reaching a level that I honestly didn't expect to see this quickly. Every game seems to create another round of questions, another round of criticism, and another round of debate about what exactly this team is trying to accomplish under Stephanie White. Because when people watch this roster, they don't see a team maximizing its talent. They see a team that often looks confused offensively, inconsistent defensively, and completely disconnected from what made Caitlin Clark such a transformational transformational player in the first place. That's the part that keeps coming up over and over again. Fans aren't just upset about losses. They're upset because they feel like they're watching a version of basketball that doesn't fit the personnel on the floor. And the criticism of Stephanie White continues to grow because of it. Every time the Fever struggle offensively, people ask the same question. How do you have Caitlin Clark on your roster and still have so many stretches where the offense looks stagnant? How do you have one of the most creative playmakers in basketball and still struggle to generate easy looks consistently? That's what people are trying to figure out. Meanwhile, the defensive side of the ball isn't exactly calming anyone's concerns either. There are possessions where rotations look late. There are possessions where players seem unsure of their assignments. There are possessions where opponents get exactly the matchup they want and nobody comes to help. And every time that happens, fans immediately point back toward coaching. Whether that's fair or not is up for debate, but that's absolutely where the conversation is heading. What's fascinating about all of this is that Caitlin Clark's rookie season actually changed a lot more than just attendance numbers and television ratings. Think about the impact she had on the league. When Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, she didn't just bring attention, she exposed weaknesses that people had been ignoring for years. One of those weaknesses was coaching. A lot of teams suddenly realized that the old style of basketball wasn't going to be enough anymore. The league had spent years relying on physicality, slower-paced offenses, and systems that weren't necessarily designed to maximize skill and spacing. Then, Caitlin Clark showed up. Suddenly, pace mattered more, spacing mattered more, shooting mattered more, playmaking mattered more. The entire conversation shifted. Organizations around the league started looking at themselves differently. Some teams began thinking about modernizing. Some teams started looking for coaches who embraced pace and space concepts. Some teams began searching for new ideas. And that's why people keep bringing up names like Teresa Weatherspoon in these discussions. Not because there aren't great women coaches in basketball. There absolutely are. The UCLA coach gets mentioned frequently by Fever fans because many believe she understands how to build around dynamic guard play. The Duke coach gets praised for similar reasons. People see systems that emphasize movement, spacing, and offensive creativity. They look at those programs and wonder what Caitlin Clark could accomplish in environments like that. Then there are professional coaches that fans discuss. Sandy Brondello is another name that comes up constantly because people see an offensive philosophy that allows skilled players to thrive. And honestly, even Christy Sides has started receiving more appreciation from certain Fever fans than she did while she was actually coaching the team. That's one of the most surprising developments, because while Christy Sides certainly had critics, many people now look back and say at least she seemed willing to let Caitlin Clark play aggressively. At least she understood that the offense needed to flow through her strengths. At least there was an effort to lean into what made Caitlin Clark special. And that's really the bigger issue. The WNBA itself has been evolving. The league has been moving toward quicker guards, more athletic perimeter players, and faster styles of play. That's the direction basketball has been heading for years, and Caitlin Clark accelerated that process. The old model of relying primarily on size and physicality isn't disappearing completely, but the importance of speed, shooting, and playmaking continues growing. We're already seeing examples of that shift. Olivia Miles represents part of that future. Sonia Citrin represents part of that future. These younger players bring different skill sets and different approaches. The game is changing, and before Caitlin Clark even arrived, Kelsey Plum was helping push that evolution forward. Sabrina Ionescu has played a major role as well. These are players who helped demonstrate what modern perimeter-oriented basketball can look like. Then, Caitlin Clark arrived and poured gasoline on the fire. The demand for faster, more entertaining basketball exploded. The conversation around freedom of movement became even bigger. The importance of perimeter creation became impossible to ignore. And perhaps most importantly, opposing teams started adjusting. That's the ironic part. Many organizations around the league reacted to Caitlin Clark's success by trying to modernize. They looked at what she was doing and said, "We need more speed, we need more shooting, we need more versatility." They understood where the sport was heading, which is why some Fever fans feel like confused about the direction of their own franchise. While other teams appeared eager to adapt, many supporters believe Indiana moved in the opposite direction. That's why Stephanie White continues becoming the focal point of so much criticism. Whether people agree or disagree with that criticism, it exists because fans expected the Fever to double down on what worked. Instead, many feel like the team moved away from it. Then there's the roster construction conversation. This might be the most underrated topic surrounding the Fever, because beyond coaching, people continue questioning whether the roster actually complements Caitlin Clark's strengths. Fans talk constantly about spacing. They talk constantly about floor-running bigs. They talk constantly about stretch forwards. And one name that repeatedly enters those conversations is Jillian Allen. Supporters see a player with size, mobility, and shooting ability. They see someone who can run the floor. They see someone who can potentially create additional spacing. And they wonder why opportunities haven't been greater. That's not a criticism aimed solely at one decision. It's part of a larger concern. Many fans look at the roster and ask whether enough thought has gone into building around Caitlin Clark's specific strengths. Because building around a superstar isn't just about collecting talent, it's about collecting the right talent. The fit matters, the chemistry matters, the style matters, and that's why roster decisions continue being scrutinized. At some point, fans stop viewing these things as isolated mistakes. They start viewing them as patterns, and once that happens, criticism grows much louder. Another interesting discussion involves expectations for Caitlin Clark herself. Earlier in the season, some observers made what sounded like a shocking prediction. Forget MVP, forget individual awards. There were people openly wondering whether Caitlin Clark could potentially face challenges making the All-Star team if her numbers continued declining within the current system. Now, on the surface, that sounds ridiculous. Caitlin Clark remains one of the biggest stars in sports. Her popularity is undeniable, her fan support is undeniable. But All-Star selections involve more than just popularity alone. Narratives matter, media perceptions matter, performance matters, and critics worry that if her numbers drop significantly, those conversations become more complicated than many fans realize. That's where names like Angel Reese enter the discussion, because media narratives are powerful. If Angel Reese continues accumulating accomplishments and recognition while Caitlin Clark's numbers decline, some people believe the public conversation could shift dramatically. Whether that happens remains to be seen, but it's something fans are already talking about. That's how much concern currently exists around the Fever's direction. And ultimately, that's what all of these conversations come back to. Not one game, not one loss, not one bad shooting night. Direction. Fans want to know where this team is headed. They want to know whether the current approach is temporary or permanent. They want to know whether adjustments are coming. Most importantly, they want to know whether they'll once again see the version of Caitlin Clark that captured the attention of the entire basketball world. Because when Caitlin Clark is playing freely, everything changes. The pace changes, the energy changes, the excitement changes, the entire atmosphere around the game changes. That's why so many people continue having these debates. That's why every Fever game generates such strong reactions. And that's why every coaching decision, rotation choice, and roster move receives so much attention. The expectations are simply enormous. For now, the questions remain unanswered, but one thing is certain. The spotlight on Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Plum, Sabrina Ionescu, Olivia Miles, Sonia Citron, Angel Reese, Jillian Allen, Christy Sides, Teresa Weatherspoon, and the Indiana Fever isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Every game adds another chapter to the story, and fans will continue watching closely to see whether the Fever eventually find the formula that unlocks the full potential everyone believes this team possesses. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, so much appreciate you being here. Like, comment, subscribe.